So, the talk today, how sustainable is the internet? My name's Jack Lennox and I live in Lancaster, and I'm a principal engineer at Automatic, the company behind WordPress.com. And I'm currently studying also for an MSc in Sustainability and Behaviour Change at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales. That's quite a mouthful. So I'm here, I'm afraid, today to tell you that the internet has an enormous carbon footprint. Sorry, I'm just going to get my, if the IT sector were a country, it would be the third largest energy consumer on Earth. This is a little bit out of date now, this study, so it's probably worse than this. This was from Click Clean, which is a program run by Greenpeace, showing in 2012 that the internet consumed 1.8 billion, is it? Yeah, kilowatt hours of electricity. It's quite an alarming number. And that's rapidly growing. And the reason that energy consumption is rapidly growing is that the internet looks a bit like this. We all kind of see it on our screens and on our phones. But what it actually is lots and lots and lots and lots of servers. So this is a data center. And you can see these are basically racks of computers. This is kind of the cloud in reality. And if you ever get a chance to visit a data center, you will see exactly how it consumes so much energy, because these rooms are incredibly loud, they're incredibly hot, they need to be air conditioned. Each one of the racks that you can see in this photo will be consuming about as much electricity as 15 kettles all at once. And in a typical data center, in a quite small data center, you'll be looking at several hundred of these racks. In the larger data centers, you'll be looking at thousands. And to also put into perspective the growth in energy, in 2012, there were about 500,000 data centers on Earth. Today, there are about 8 million. So that's obviously gone up many, many times in just the last 8 years. And this energy is forecast to grow exponentially at the moment. So this is from a paper from Nature, the Nature journal. And as you can see, they're projecting energy consumption of the internet to rise to something in the region of 21% by 2030. So this is including the production of ICT as well, but yeah, the networks, the consumer devices, the data centers. It's really quite alarming. And the reason the carbon footprint is so bad, and I suspect many people won't need me to tell them this, but that's that currently our global energy mix is not very clean. So there's a great project called the Electricity Map, electricitymap.org. I highly recommend it, and I can share my slides if anyone wants these links. They're trying this. A group in it's in Copenhagen have put together this online project where they're trying to capture all of the live data. So this is based on energy as it's being produced right now across the world, and to give us a picture of how that mix looks. And obviously it's not complete yet. They're still adding countries, and some countries don't have live data available. But it's come a long way. I think about 5 years ago, it was just a few countries in Europe. And now it's obviously spanning quite a lot of the world. We've got some of North America, South America, Australia. But what you can see, the countries that are green are countries with low carbon intensity. So that's generally speaking high levels of renewable energy, or it could be nuclear as well because it's low carbon. And then what you've got in the darker countries are lots of carbon. So that's going to be obviously coal, gas, oil in some places. So yeah, it's not great. And this powering the internet is why the internet produces about 1 billion tons of CO2 every year. And then if you want to sort of have that put into perspective, that's about 2% of global emissions. It's about the same as global air travel, or at least it was before coronavirus. So global air travel's emissions have probably gone down quite a lot in the past 9 months. But yeah, pre-COVID, the internet had about the same carbon footprint as global air travel. And due to the energy mix of the internet, this makes it, one way we can think about it is as the largest coal-fired machine on Earth, which is quite a sad achievement. Now, one thing some of you might be thinking is that surely this isn't necessarily a bad thing because the internet has displaced old ways of doing things, and presumably it's greener than those old ways of doing things. Well, I'm afraid to say, certainly in some cases, that's not the case. So a professor of musicology at the University of Oslo, Carl Devin, looked into this in looking at music in particular. And his study concluded that music streaming has a far worse carbon footprint than the heyday of records and CDs. And in fact, what he found was that Spotify alone had a larger carbon footprint than the entire record industry in the year 2000. So that's all the records, CDs, tapes, and everything that were being produced and sold. So we're actually finding that some of these ways that we're doing things digitally, it's actually worse than what we did before in terms of its carbon emissions. This was a fairly niche topic. I've been talking about it for quite a while within my industry and sort of doing more technical talks around sort of how we can deal with this, but it actually became the subject of a dispatches program, which is still available on Channel 4's website, which is kind of part of the problem because you would watch it online. Anyway, I won't get into that kind of inception here, but I highly recommend checking out this dispatches program. They take two families and they kind of look into the carbon emissions related to their online habits. It's also very recently been picked up, and I've pointedly used the Daily Mail because I was surprised that they picked this up. There's been a study by the Royal Society in the last week. You might have heard it on the Today programme if you listen. They did a little segment on it. So the Royal Society have done quite a sweeping study of digital technology and how it can help us tackle the climate emergency. But alongside some of what they were looking at in terms of how technology can be used to optimize wind farms and that sort of thing, they also looked at the impact of some of our habits. And so one of their interesting discoveries through that was that they looked at video streaming and found that streaming in standard definition rather than 4K is a massive reduction. I think there's 8 times the emissions to stream in 4K than standard definition. And there are separate problems here that we can talk about afterwards around how Netflix are now defaulting to streaming in 4K. So they will stream video in 4K to your TV, even if your TV doesn't support it. So basically a load of data is being downloaded and then immediately discarded. It's quite alarming. So this is the actual Royal Society paper itself. It's quite a tome, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading it, but the sort of press notes are quite interesting. You can just sort of read through the bullet points. Within the industry itself, this is sort of becoming an increasingly sort of big problem and something that we're sort of acknowledging, and certainly organizations that I'm affiliated with. So Mozilla, which are sort of one of the biggest non-profits involved in the running of the internet effectively, did an internet health report in 2018. They do an annual internet health report, and they really put a spotlight on this. And they said that sustainability should be a bigger priority, especially as the internet expands into new territory. As I mentioned before, Greenpeace, through their Click Clean program, have been running for quite some time now. I think it started in 2011. They've been looking at the sort of environmental performance of the big tech companies and rating them based on their transparency, on what they're proposing to do, and on what they're currently doing. And there are limitations to this that we can maybe discuss at the end, but as you can see, they sort of do rate Facebook and YouTube quite highly. Google, interestingly, as a company, are one of the best performing. That if you look at they're very transparent in terms of what energy they use. There are some limitations to what they're doing, but they are, I think, as of it was the end of last year, they are now a sort of officially 100% powered by renewable energy. Some of that is still through offsets and stuff, and it's, you know, there are problems in how much energy they need and how it's kind of outstripping the ability for us to build this infrastructure. But Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, is actually the largest corporate buyer of renewable energy in the world. So kind of linked to this is the issue with websites and the websites we use and the apps that we use and everything else. And poorly performing websites are bad for the environment because, well, I'll kind of outline how this problem works. So in 2011, the average web page was 929 kilobytes. So that's just under 1 megabyte. By 2017, the average website was just over 3 megabytes. In fact, today, the average website is between 4 and 4.5 megabytes in size. So they're growing increasingly. And we can see why this is by looking at this breakdown of the different types of things that we get from a website. So this is slightly technical. There's some stuff in here that you won't know what it's talking about, which is fine. But as you can see, images is a huge part of the internet. And in 2011, it wasn't that big a part of a page. I mean, it was more than half the data that we were downloading. But as you can see what's happened going down to July 2017, and in fact, I don't have a newer chart than this one, but the video has become huge. So video has got bigger and bigger, starting quite big time in 2015. Video is actually now more than, it's about 60% of all of the data that we download over the internet. And images, there's just more and more, they're bigger and bigger, they're higher and higher quality. Some of these other things are kind of the code that power the internet, so the scripts and the HTML. You don't really need to know about that, and they're also a tiny part of what we're actually downloading on the internet. So yeah, this was this is data now from last year, but November 2019, the average website was about 4 megabytes. So in fact, based on the trend, it's probably now between 4.5 and 5 megabytes. But for argument's sake, we can stick with 4. So a focus, as I say, is increasingly coming on this. There was a study at the University of Bristol which looked at a design change that YouTube could make to make quite a significant cut to its CO2 emissions. The paper is actually available here. And what this study looked at was the emissions relating to people using YouTube for audio. So something that's become bigger and bigger over the past few years is music being available on YouTube. Through official channels like Vivo. These are these publishers who make, put the music videos and stuff online, and lots of playlists are now available. And so people will play music on their phone. Say at a party, someone might have a phone or a computer in the corner of the room, they'll plug it into a hi-fi, and it'll be playing away with a video, often playing in HD or maybe even 4K that no one's actually watching. They just want the music. Interestingly, YouTube have created a premium service where you can turn the video off. So there's the YouTube Music app, and YouTube Premium allows you to play without video. This paper kind of criticizes that because it's something that should be available to everyone, because you're sort of forcing people to pay to use less of the service, which is kind of a strange concept. This is something that shouldn't be a premium feature. It should just be part of how YouTube works. And they estimated that if YouTube were to implement this one design change, it could reduce the carbon footprint of YouTube by about 5%, which would be the equivalent of the energy use of a city like Glasgow over the course of a year. So yeah, this is the actual paper. It's not too bad, actually. If you fancy a read on something, it's quite interesting. And so the core problem here is that every byte transferred, so every byte of data that we're downloading onto our phones or our laptops or whatever else, represents energy being consumed. And about 40 to 45% of the energy is on your device itself, but the other 55% is the data centers, and it's the networks that actually, the switches and everything else that get that data from wherever it is to you. So Nature, they looked into this, and they looked into, there's a really great article where they considered how we can actually calculate sort of what this equates to. So there have been various approaches to this, but the figure that I think started with Nature, and then it's been slightly refined by some other groups, is that it's about 1.8 kilowatt hours per gigabyte, or about 1.8 watts per megabyte. So once we know how much energy is required to transfer data, we can then actually work out the carbon footprint of that data. So I showed you the electricity map earlier. That does give you a breakdown, but in the UK, we have the carbon intensity API. Don't worry about what API stands for. That's a separate thing. But basically, it's a way that we can get this raw data of how much carbon dioxide is being produced per kilowatt in this country right now. And as you can see, they forecast as well, so we can see what's going to be happening based on if the wind's going to be blowing, what the weather's doing, that sort of thing. But we can see, I took this screenshot a bit earlier today. So the current carbon intensity in the UK is about 257 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And so if we wanted to work out how much energy the carbon footprint of our average web page, we can do some math. I'm just going to take a sip of my tea and clear my throat, and then I'll be back. So I hope this makes some sense. So we know that we're producing 257 grams of CO2 per kilowatt. So if we want to work out what that is per watt, we just divide that by 1,000. So it's 0.257 grams of CO2 per watt. We know that it's about 1.8 watts per megabyte, and we know we're downloading, let's say, 4 megabytes, which was the average web page size last year. So we multiply those two numbers together and we get 7.2 watts. And then we multiply the two numbers together at the bottom, so 0.257 grams by 7.2 watts, and we get about 1.85 grams of CO2. So this is the carbon emissions of loading one average-sized web page once. And to put this into perspective, the paper industry estimates that a single piece of paper takes about 4 to 5 grams of CO2 to produce. So within 3 loads of the average web page, we've hit the same amount of CO2 being produced as would be produced for a page of paper. So this idea that you've often seen, you've probably seen with people on emails that will say, oh, save the planet, don't print this email. One thing that a lot of people don't think about is actually the carbon footprint of the email itself. And lots of people do sort of reply alls and everything when they don't really need to, and everyone's getting all these emails. And really printing it is sort of only half the problem. And certainly when we think about all the spam emails that are sent and all the newsletters we might receive that we don't really read, and there's a heck of a lot of e-waste that actually does incur a significant amount of CO2 that we really should be thinking about. If you want to sort of look more into this, there's a great project called the Website Carbon Calculator. This is websitecarbon.com. You come here and you can type in any URL for a website that you use, and they'll tell you what the carbon footprint is of that website. They've also got some great examples of websites that and applications that use less data and ways that they can do that. It's a good tool. In terms of like what might a sort of a low carbon website look like, one of the more extreme solutions is one I really like called the Low Tech Magazine. So this is a solar powered website, and so sometimes it doesn't work. And there's a fantastic explanation of how it's built. It does get a little bit technical in some places, but the long and short of it is this is run by a chap in Barcelona. So he's set up a little solar panel on his balcony, which works in Barcelona. It maybe wouldn't work so well in Lancaster. And he's connected it to a battery, and he's connected that to a Raspberry Pi, which is the server running his website. If anyone hasn't seen them, a Raspberry Pi is a very cheap computer. It's about the size of a credit card, I guess. And you can buy them for about 35, 40 pounds. They're really good. They use them a lot in education. So that's running his website. And the website actually shows you there. So you might see the kind of background is kind of half peachy and then it's sort of bluer at the top. And that's actually to show you the level of battery at the moment. And the website also shows you sort of what the weather's like right now. And so when the battery is full, the page looks very peachy and it's kind of that sort of fills up the whole screen. And as the battery drains, that sort of drains down. So it's quite fun. You can see like where it's at. If it hits 0, the website goes offline and doesn't work. And then when the sun shines again, it comes back online. It's a really nice idea. It's obviously not necessarily scalable, and you wouldn't want your bank to work like this because that would be quite irritating. But it's a really interesting project, and the technology that he's used is fantastic. So I've had the pleasure quite recently of working with a designer called Tom Jarrett. He's been exploring these kind of different ways that we can think about how we design services and digital services and digital technologies within the sort of limits that we have, and trying to create lower carbon web services. So I've got a video that I want to quickly show, and I hope I have done the optimized thing. So he came up with this idea for a low energy Instagram, which I just want to quickly show. So there's no audio, but as you can see, it's this quite nice idea where instead of just showing all of the images straight up, you initially get the description and then you decide if you want to look at that image or not. And this would massively reduce the carbon emissions of something like Instagram. And I think he's also got a little thing that shows you like how much CO2 each image incurs, which is a really nice idea. And so we actually took this to sort of more of an extreme with a project I've been involved in called Branch Magazine. And this is through a group called Climate Action Tech, which is a sort of broad alliance of people working in the tech industry that want to take climate action. So we've built this magazine that both raises awareness about the sustainability of the internet, but is also built in a way that sort of optimizes itself to provide kind of the most performance service it can. And so this is a screenshot of how the website looks when we're in a state of high grid intensity, which the UK by our sort of measure currently is. So I took this screenshot slightly earlier today. And I will actually show a little demo of this after I've gone through these slides. But the image is blanked out. And if we scroll a bit further down, which I'll show you in a second, you can see what the image is. Then you decide if you want to see it or not, a bit like that Instagram example. In a moderate grid intensity situation, everything changes slightly. So we have, instead of the orange, we have the blue. In case you might be able to see in the top left-hand corner, the logo up here, it actually changes slightly as well. So in the high intensity, it's orange and there's no leaves on the little branch, but on this one, we can now see a leaf and it's blue. So this is moderate intensity. And the images are made black and white, which massively reduces their size. And then we also kind of reduce the quality of them. In a low grid intensity situation where the grid is quite clean and relatively green, we show a green version of the website with the full logo and with all of the images showing. And this is a really nice thing. It's something that I think obviously websites could adapt to include. It's not something that's quite as out there as the Barcelona example I showed you. So I'm just going to demonstrate what this looks like. So if I go to, just to show you, oh, so we've gone back down to moderate now. We were in a high state. So yeah, you can see these images are, that one doesn't look so good. This is kind of a weird illustration anyway, but yeah, so this is kind of what it looks like in a moderate situation. I am actually going to quickly switch it back to high, which I'm going to fake it because I did want to just show you that particular feature. So ignore what I'm doing right now. I'm going to fake it into thinking that we're in high grid intensity. So yeah, this is what I was going to show you. So for example, the image now, it will say what the issue is, what the image is. So this is also very good for kind of highlighting some of the accessibility features of the internet. So someone, for example, who uses the internet through a screen reader who has sight issues or is blind, they'll see the internet through these descriptions of what images are. So it's nice in that sense as well that it ties together some best practice things about the internet. But yeah, so if you read this description and you think, I do want to see that, you can click on the image and then you get the image. And if we go on to something like the this example I showed before, so the forward, if we now click and we get the full image. And that's how this looks. So yeah, and then as I say, it's dynamic. So this massively reduces how much data this website delivers when you're looking at it. So under these current conditions, it's going to be about 1/10 of what it would be if all of the images were being shown at full quality. So Tom, yeah, I'll just pop this back into full screen. So Tom wrote an article describing all of this. It's a good read. It's not too techy. It's sort of, this discussing this pioneering idea of demand responsive design, where the applications we use actually change themselves based on how the grid currently is. And because I think one of the interesting things as we shift into a sort of more renewable world, which I'm hoping we're going to get to sooner rather than later, sometimes with renewable energy there is going to be an abundance. When the wind's blowing and the sun's shining and everything's optimal, we're going to have maybe an oversupply of electricity, which we even sometimes already have in the UK. Some wind farms have to lock their turbines because there's too much energy. So in those situations, it's fine to be streaming Netflix and everything else, kind of in a sense. But yeah, it's about sort of how do we deal with the troughs, and how do we deal with the peaks as well. So another really interesting article, someone who wrote an article for Branch, Lu Ye, she's an industrial designer from China, and she kind of took this to a lot of these ideas to a sort of much greater extreme. So she's been studying at the Royal College of Art, and she put together a project with some excellent videos that I wanted to share that sort of really summarize sort of where we're at right now and how digital experiences could be optimized for the world that we live in at the moment. So there's 2 videos I'm just going to quickly show. These do have audio, so you should hear this because I've that's that one. And then there's the other video. Yeah, so her idea is this online OS. This is an operating system that could run on a tablet device. This is a demonstration of how we might actually communicate. So thinking of sort of lower energy ways of people communicating across the world, maybe not using high definition video streaming. So there's some really nice ideas.
Needs online OS and applications with the principles, interactions, and decisions of the future carbon-aware internet. When more and more internet applications are wind power supported, online helps you minimize your entertainment carbon footprint. During low carbon times when the wind blows, internet usage costs little emission. During high carbon times, however, it's better to be cautious of those data-heavy activities. A system navigation lottery suggests low data alternatives that you may also like. With a bit of serendipity, you will find yourself saving some CO2 and enjoying the time in your own way. Online's default video telephonic application runs on solar power. Designed for non-sunny times, the low data calling mode offers another sense of connection as an alternative to video. You can feel the presence of each other through visualized touches across the internet. Online makes it possible for social media platforms to commit to tidal power. During the tide times, you can save what you want to read later. And the system also automatically stores those you miss out during mindless scrolling. In the other time of the day, the saved content in the reservoirs are prioritized. In this way, you save CO2 while taking a closer look at what you have passed by.
But yeah, so I'm pretty much at the end, and I'm very happy to take questions and open up the discussion. One thing I just sort of wanted to sort of conclude with, I didn't actually put a slide in for this, but typically these sort of things end in, so what can I do? And I like to think that in the Green Party, we're sort of more about system change and not about people just trying to change these things personally. And I'm certainly not trying to say to anyone that you should not stream music or something. And even though vinyl is great fun and it's a good way to support the artists that you like, because as we know, the streaming services also don't do very well on the royalties to our artists. But I think what's interesting about thinking about the sustainability of the internet and why I think this is a relevant topic for everyone is that I think we've shifted a lot of our behavior to being more paper-free and to being more digital and putting everything in the cloud and sort of thinking it has no consequences when it really does. And I think one of the most interesting examples from that Dispatches documentary that I talked about at the start is she speaks to an academic, the presenter, about the carbon footprint of Zoom, for example, and a Zoom call. And what they looked into was, taking the UK as a typical example, a Zoom call between two people for 1 hour. And I can't remember what the actual carbon footprint was, but it was the equivalent of driving about 2 miles in a car, in a sort of average petrol car, or traveling about 10 miles by rail. And so when you extrapolate that out to 15 people, 30 people having a Zoom call, we might all assume, and obviously under coronavirus restrictions that we have limitations on what we can do, but you certainly might assume an online event is greener than a physical event. But for, if there's a group of us living in Lancaster, it's very possibly lower carbon for 15 or 30 of us to get together in a room that's maybe already being heated and everything else, than it is to get on Zoom and speak over Zoom. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I think we should shift away from assuming that digital services have no carbon footprint and that there's nothing to worry about. And I think we should at least start to think about these things and start to account for them in terms of how we do our business. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you. Sorry about the video thing, but yeah, I'll share those links and you can watch them. There's just some nice music and some narration from Lou Ye. Any questions?
Jack, can you stop sharing?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, so I can see people then, so can you, hopefully.
Oh yeah, sorry about the sound. I'm just seeing the chat now. Damn.
Yes, Gina has a question. I think. Gina. Oh no, maybe you don't.
Sorry, yeah, so I do, and I'm here. Thank you, that was great. I just wanted to ask straight away, I mean, I know this is much more of a systems issue, like you said, Jack. So I've got questions about that, but just on a very, on a kind of practical level. I mean, I have never thought about this, so this is really interesting for me. It's the first time I've thought about this kind of thing, really. You know, I still actually find it a little bit difficult to, when you say a website. So can I just blurt out my misunderstandings and you can maybe explain? So firstly, when you say a web page, that's obviously only when somebody looks at it. So the web page itself is sitting there waiting for somebody to look, and it's when you look that you're using the energy. And when you click on the video, you're using more, so it's a responsibility of the provider to make that as low carbon as possible. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing is, just in terms of these emails, it'd be music to my ears if you told us all, actually, it's far better not to keep copying people in and not to reply all, and to just say, just do it when absolutely necessary, and no other situation at all should you ever email anyone.
That is 100% the case.
Great. It was worth coming this evening. I've got an excuse.
Yeah, it's...
Sorry, I feel so much better that I never join in now.
Yeah, no, that is I mean, it's difficult, and I appreciate with like the executive and stuff, you know, you have a mailing list and that sort of thing, and you know, and there is benefit in that, but yeah, certainly sometimes, and I think certainly in a lot of corporate environments where people do sort of reply all just to make it look like they're working and stuff, and or not make it look like they're working, but try and like justify themselves, and yeah, I think a lot of situations where people do that, it's unnecessary, and that certainly is a higher carbon way of using the internet. But yeah, and sorry if I've gone a bit technical. I'm sort of I've delivered a lot of talks to developers, so I'm used to sort of doing more technical stuff. But it's not something I really thought about until I think 2017 was when I sort of first got exposed to the idea of it. And I've been working in this industry for ages, and I had a sort of a back of my mind thought, but some of these things I didn't really realize that they're worse than the analog sort of real world solutions that we used before.
And I'm sorry, just to focus on these really minor issues, but like not having a video on is better than having a video on in a meeting like this, presumably.
Massively, actually, yes. That's one thing that comes up in dispatches. So if we all turn the video off,
we all going to see each other.
That's the biggest part of the energy that we're using in this call.
Okay.
Tim had a question. Tim, you're on.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry I left the video on all the time. So one of the things that struck me as you were telling us about this, which is news to me, is that the universities going online, which they've done massively, and indeed the council going online and taking up Teams. As we come out of COVID, which hopefully won't be too far away, these institutions will be trying to stay online. That in some ways it makes their work more efficient. Once all the university lecturers, Emily will tell us about this, have prepared their materials, it's good business for the university to reuse these materials. And there will be an argument about reducing the carbon footprint of these activities of the local council, of people driving across Lancaster district to go to a committee meeting or a council meeting. But actually what you're telling us is that we should resist that there are other very good reasons for resisting it, but we should resist it on carbon saving grounds.
I suppose it's difficult because there's a trade-off with all of these things, and I think so. One other thing I didn't mention in the talk is that the efficiency basically of our networks is increasing substantially. So I think the carbon footprint of digital communications sort of is halving roughly every 2 years. It's sort of like a reverse Moore's law. So so in theory, our sort of the emissions relating to the things we do online is shrinking. But the trouble is, another thing which some people on the call might be familiar with is Jevons paradox, which relates to sort of 19th century economics around coal, and yeah, it's basically the more efficiently you can burn coal, the more coal you ultimately burn, and that's sort of what's been happening with the internet. So the more efficiently we can do stuff, the more of the resource is still used. So the internet's emissions are still going up, even though it gets much more efficient, because the way we use it just gets more and more advanced and more data heavy. So to come to your question, Tim, I think it's, what I would probably say is resist it on the idea that people say it's greener. I think that's the main thing we need to just be mindful of in these situations. It's not necessarily greener to do that. There are other reasons. There's accessibility reasons, and there's lots of good reasons to make things available online. And I think certainly it's enriched the academic experience of lots of people to be able to have resources available, to be able to have recorded lectures and everything else. But yeah, these things aren't necessarily greener. But I think it's a trade-off, and but yeah, I think one thing I've found very frustrating, and especially the more I've learned, is that there's just this assumption that anything digital is green and it's all fine. And as long as it's digital, don't need to worry about it. And that's wrong. And yeah, that's something we do need to be thinking about.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, next we have a question from Joanna, then a comment from Emily, and then a question from Mandy. So yeah, Joanna, next.
Thank you so much. I thought that was really, really fascinating. I just wondered, in terms of awareness of this issue, I mean, we're all in the Green Party and this all sounds like news to us. Do you think that there is an awareness within the digital and tech industries that this is an issue? I mean, I used to work for a digital agency and I've never seen on a spec for a website that sustainability was one of the criteria upon which they would choose either design or functionality. So is there any awareness of this, and how does the industry go about starting to put that in as a criteria? Because obviously as consumers we can't necessarily control how much we're going to be downloading, but obviously in terms of people who actually build websites, I'd just be interested to know are these discussions happening in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say they are, but it's definitely been slow. So I kind of, I had this kind of in the back of my head. In 2017, I saw a talk where someone sort of laid it out quite starkly, and I found it amazing, and I then sort of decided to take up the mantle sort of within my company. And I've given talks at conferences and stuff, and normally I get sort of a fairly dumbfounded reaction, even from software engineers, but it seems to make quite an impact. So I've certainly, over the past 3 years that I've been sort of talking about this a lot and banging this drum, the awareness has gone up massively. And so there's lots of projects like that website Carbon that didn't exist 3 years ago. And there are now agencies and companies that are making this part of their selling point. So actually the team behind website Carbon is an agency in London called Whole Grain Digital. And I know the founder, Tom, and it's a huge part of what they do. So they, they sell sustainability as part of their service. They're a B corporation as well, so they're kind of tied into all of the sort of grander aspects of that. But the way they run their agency, but it is something they actually incorporate in their pitches, and it's certainly, they're currently working with the sort of greener brands like eCover and those kinds of things. But yeah, it's definitely becoming interesting. Tom's actually just written a book called Sustainable Web Design for one of the big industry publishers, so that's coming out I think in February. In fact, I think I'm not supposed to say that because it's not official yet. Anyway, forget that. But yeah, there are books coming out. There was a book a few years ago by O'Reilly, which is one of the big publishers, called Designing for Sustainability, where some of these ideas sort of first started circulating. But yeah, you're certainly now seeing it getting picked up by the big companies. But yeah, and it's frustrating because there's a lot of greenwash as well. If you look at Amazon get they get hammered in the dispatches program because they're sort of quite vague about the whole thing. What a lot of people don't know is that Amazon, more than half of their income, their profit, is actually generated through AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is their online infrastructure that they sell to businesses. So, and lots of stuff runs on AWS. So in fact, the Channel 4 player, like the Channel 4 website, is on Amazon Web Services. So lots of services you use, you don't even know about it, are Amazon. And sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but the point is it's definitely becoming a thing, and I think it's definitely something that people are thinking about. Fortunately, the other thing I would say is that the industry has been sort of leaning towards some of these principles for other reasons. So they've been, Google has spent lots and lots and lots of time optimizing their data centers, because the fact is, if their data centers use less energy, it saves them money. So there is a good sort of economic incentive as well here. But yeah, there are kind of those broader issues around the sort of long tail is quite bad. And so a lot of typically the sort of the more amateurish an outfit that's producing websites and apps, the heavier the app's going to be, the less optimized it's going to be. But there are lots of things. Browsers as well actually are getting a lot better. So your browser itself, if you're using Chrome or Firefox, it's doing a lot of things now in the background that it wouldn't have done before to reduce the amount of data that you're downloading. So there are lots of ways it is being tackled. And that's why I kind of wanted to talk about it, but I didn't want to talk about it in a way of trying to preach to anyone about, don't go online because it's bad for the environment, because I think that's kind of missing the point. But yeah, so this is changing, but it really does have to change the next few years. If the internet doesn't change its trajectory, it's pretty catastrophic in terms of its energy usage. We're going to be consuming way more than is possible. And something they tackle in the dispatches program is that as much as Google and everyone are piling money into this, they're also kind of riding on the backs of governments and on public money. Because in Ireland, for example, where Google are building this massive new data center, it needs more energy than the Irish grid can provide. So Google can do their offsets and they can buy renewable energy and stuff. But if the energy is just not there, it has to be built. And then there's a controversy there because the taxpayer is actually going to put in the infrastructure so that Google get it at sort of market rate, when arguably Google should build those wind turbines themselves. That shouldn't be down to the Irish government. Anyway, sorry, that was a very rambling answer. But yeah, so there's lots happening, and it's definitely, I'm sort of one of the people that talks about this a lot. So I now encounter a lot of people, but I get emails on a sort of daily basis from people who've seen the videos of my talks at conferences and stuff where they want to know more about it. And Branch, this magazine that we've launched, has had a huge impact among technologists and the people who can actually change things here.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Joe, you got another question? Go on. You sure? Okay. Mandy asked, everyone actually, but I'll put it to you. Oh no, Emily asked, and then Mandy. Is it possible to recycle the heat produced by servers for district heating systems?
Yes, and somewhere is actually doing this. I think it's typically in the Netherlands. It's somewhere like that where they have exactly that. And in fact, also a lot of some of the biggest data centers are in countries that are naturally cool. So yeah, I guess one of the problems here is that a lot of data centers are in hot places, which is really annoying. So the heat is useless because, well, more kind of useless because a district heating system isn't what's needed. I guess there are ways that could be converted into something else. There's definitely been a lot going on in terms of designing data centers to be as sort of as blended in with their environment as possible. So there was a big focus on the Facebook one a couple of years ago that was built around sort of wind flows, so that as the wind flew through, they didn't need air conditioning basically because it was built to sort of harness the wind and use the wind to naturally cool down everything else. But yeah, there are, and in fact I will find one and I'll send it to you, Emily. But there is an article about one that does exactly that, and certainly obviously in Europe that would be a great idea, because some of the data centers, even in somewhere like Manchester or London, they're running air conditioning to cool those data centers down. So we really need to change that because that's just completely bonkers.
Cool. Mandy.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Jack. That was really interesting. Quite mind-blowing. I hadn't realised that all this stuff I was doing. So no more cat videos for me. Not that but I mean, the whole clickbait industry. I mean, it has even more, ethical reasons not to be drawn in now. And I think this whole issue needs magnifying, doesn't it? And I'm sure it's going to be the next biggest thing. So my question is very similar to Emily's, really. I'm interested in where the data centers are. Are they evenly distributed over the globe, or are there literally hotspots of where the carbon dumping is being concentrated? Where,
are local communities going to be affected in the same way as we're affected by high levels of pollutants from cars, say, you know, just to draw that comparison. Yeah, I think that's my main question.
Yeah, sure. So so I guess to answer the first question, Mandy, like the data centers are so one of the concepts that affects the placement of a data center is latency. And so basically the further data has to travel, the slower it kind of the more it's sort of delayed, and the slower it runs. So data centers are basically where people are. So where there's lots of people that need the data, that's kind of where these data centers are. And the way that the big companies work is they have data centers all around the world that replicate the stuff that's on their servers in lots of different places. So if you're accessing Google or YouTube in London, you're going straight to the London data center. That's going to have a version of everything on YouTube, effectively the same as the one in, but yeah, so you're getting it closer to you. So they tend to be in big cities. So they tend to be, there's lots and lots of data centers in London. There's some big data centers in Manchester. There's probably, I mean, there's probably one in Lancaster somewhere, maybe not a very big one. So the emissions, obviously, it's not like, and I think this is part of the problem, the emissions are completely hidden because it's just relating to the energy production in the same way that electricity powering your house. You know, if it's a data center in Lancaster, they're just going to be drawing loads of power off the grid. But it's down to the grid to work out how that gets delivered. So the emissions are not visible, and they don't affect people directly, I suppose. And so, you know, in London, the web emissions aren't contributing to London's air quality. Well, except I don't know how many. There aren't any sort of big fossil power stations, I think, in London anymore. But obviously they are. That's being felt somewhere. So I'd imagine in London it's still probably Drax, and then it's going to be all the different renewable energy we've got, and then some of the smaller nuclear in Kent and stuff. So so it's quite complicated, and I think that's part of the issue, is that you don't see any of that. And you know, you get your device, and they kind of talk about this in the dispatches thing as well. You know, it's just you know, with a car or something, it's really obvious that there are emissions related to this. But one other interesting thing, just on that note, is that Apple are very good at transparency. You know, I mean, I don't think they're not my favorite company, but they put together a life cycle analysis for the iPhone, the new iPhone 12, I think it is, and sort of to bring this to a kind of broader point around, like, do we change our behavior or do we change what we do? Only 14% of the iPhone's emissions, according to Apple's life cycle analysis, will actually come from the usage. So the vast majority of those emissions are in producing the device itself and getting it to you. And so I suppose if you're thinking about something like digital emissions, it's still it's the bigger things that would make a difference. So like, just don't buy a new phone, like buy a refurbished phone or something instead, and try to hold your devices for longer. One of the things in the Royal Society paper is that we should try to hold on to any of our electrical devices for 7 years, whereas most people, I think the average at the moment is about 18 months. And that's terrible. And there are some other things I didn't mention, like Fairphone. I've got a Fairphone, and one interesting thing that Fairphone have done is they've made the phone modular. So everyone wants to update their phone because they want a new camera. That's the case with the new iPhone, which has a very good camera. So Fairphone are trying to tackle that by modularizing it, so you can just buy the camera and add that to your. So the Fairphone upgrade the camera, you buy the camera, you upgrade the camera, the rest of the phone is fine. Because again, Apple score really badly in terms of repairability, and anyone who's had an iPhone will know that they're very difficult to repair. They're sort of designed for you to not be able to repair them. It's all kind of glued together and shut, and that's the end of that. Again, sorry, I've gone on a massive tangent from what you actually said, but I think, did I cover your point with the emissions?
Yeah, I think so. So these data centers are all over, and they're evenly spread throughout, you know, the third world, you know, China.
Sorry,
Russia,
yeah, you said.
Yeah.
So no is the answer. No, they are heavily concentrated in sort of developed Western economies. So so there are far fewer in Africa. Also, the way that people actually access the internet in Africa is very different. So far more people are accessing through mobile networks than they are through broadband or wired services. So which has an impact there as well, because if you're actually getting data through sort of satellites and stuff, it's less relevant that you have a nearby data center. But yeah, no, so they're heavily concentrated. There's lots on the east coast of America. Some of the biggest data centers in the world are on the east coast of America, and then a load more on the west coast. Lots in London, the Netherlands. So Amsterdam has a lot in the US. Sorry, in Europe. Germany has a heck of a lot of data centers. Amazon are mainly focused there. So I think their biggest data centers are in Frankfurt and is it Munich? So a lot of what you would get in Europe would be through Amazon's data centers in Germany. So yeah, it tends to be big industrial cities. That's where you'll find the big data centers.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thanks.
Emily made a comment. I think Lancaster Uni has one in a big black building with no windows. Unfortunately, I might have been distracted by the football scores, and I actually don't know what she's referring to. So I'm talking about honest. I looked at my phone because it buzzed and it's football. My team are losing, and I'm sorry. So Emily, if you want to just say.
It was just when Jack was talking about data centres and where they are and whether there was one in Lancaster. I think there's one on campus, but I don't know about anywhere else.
That would absolutely, in fact, Lancaster Uni is bound to have at least a very small one just for their, because I mean, yeah, and when I say data center, people might have been familiar with a server room or something in an office, and that's effectively a very small data center. So anyone who's worked in an office that has a server room, that's kind of it. But yeah, so Lancaster Uni is going to have a fairly substantial one of those at least, and that might be, like you say, Emily, that could be an actual data center in itself. So yeah, they're. But I know certainly in the north, I think the biggest ones are in Manchester, like the nearest to us. Yeah, there's quite a few hosting companies with big data centers in Manchester.
I have a question, and it is, what has more impact? If you use Wi-Fi because you're in a cafe and you switch onto their Wi-Fi and use their Wi-Fi and you're watching videos in a cafe, which, I go out and use other people's Wi-Fi because then I'm not using mine. Or when I'm forced to use my data, if I'm sat in the castle or the Story Garden watching something, what has the more impact, data or Wi-Fi?
It's much, much better to use Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi has much lower energy usage than your data. The worst of all worlds is the data. And as we're increasing, sort of getting back to that Jevons paradox thing, we're bringing out 5G now, and 5G is really clever and it's going to get more data to your phone, and it'll do it at a lower sort of energy consumption per megabyte, but you're probably going to end up downloading even more because you'll get, with faster internet, and we'll watch more video, and this is where it sort of just doesn't really ever catch up. It's kind of like building roads to ease traffic. Like the more roads there are, the more people drive, the more cars. It just doesn't actually fix it. So but yeah, so to your question, Chris, I meant to mention that actually. Yeah, so yeah, 4G is really not good. If you're sat watching Netflix on 4G, really try and avoid that. Much better to be on Wi-Fi.
Cool, thank you. I was right to steal the cafe's Wi-Fi. No, they give it free most times. Yeah, but I don't actually sit outside other people's houses doing it, so that's fine. Have we got any more questions, folks?
I think Gina has a raised hand.
Yeah, I couldn't see because I put my handy chat box in front of your face, Gina.
All right,
Gina.
Sorry.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I've had time to catch up with myself and ask some sensible political questions now. So one of the things that you were talking about was how the excess renewable energy could be, or when there's capacity of renewable energy, it can be used to give a higher definition or a better service. But I'm just aware that there's so many calls on that demand of excess renewable energy. So, it's like, oh, we can use excess renewable energy for green hydrogen or for battery storage or other things. So it's like that all needs to be kind of accounted for somewhere. So I don't know whether that's coming into the mix in the thinking. And the other thing was I was just wondering whether, some of, because this is totally new to me, but is there, and I imagine there is, but are there calls for legislation? So it's not just kind of relying on companies to do this because they might save money or for goodwill, but actually to start processes for legislating for regulations and low energy design in websites, etc. So
yeah, so there certainly is. I'm not fully up to date with the latest details on it, but certainly the thing I mentioned in Ireland, that's leading to potential legislation, because there's understandable consternation from many Irish lawmakers about having to produce this energy that Google's going to need, even though the grid doesn't currently support it. So yeah, I know it's definitely becoming a thing, and I think it's one of those weird things, because as the grid is greening, sort of just through all of the laws of economics, even just because wind and solar are now the cheapest and easiest way of producing energy. So and the greening of the grid will green the internet. So it's kind of one of those things that will sort of happen kind of automatically, but obviously that does depend on the energy being available. And if the energy of the internet just keeps going up, we're into sort of unknown territory in terms of who puts the infrastructure in place. So I think yeah, I think we're at the very beginning of it being challenged. I'm not aware of anything currently through sort of the European Union or anything, but I know there are, certainly in America, it's been more left to, they don't have a national grid, so in the way that we do. So basically, like, that is where a lot of the development, where Google have just literally built wind farms because and Amazon and Facebook, and because they need them. So yeah, but in terms of, sorry, that's kind of that's the other end of it. In terms of legislating for the sort of size of a website or something, yeah, I've not had anything about that, but I think certainly browsers are becoming stricter on it. And again, so something Google are doing that's quite good, if your website is slow and thereby probably heavy in terms of its data, they penalize you now. So you're actually going to you won't rank as highly as a website if it's a slow, heavy website. So the lighter and faster it is, the more likely you're going to, that's part of their metric now for what they recommend. If you type in, I don't know, new shoes or something, you're going to get the fastest websites coming up at the top. But you shouldn't buy new shoes, buy secondhand.
I was just going to say, I'm sure we can assume that Europe will lead on this in terms of regulation or legislation. But I think that this would be, I think the Greens EFA group would be really interested in hearing from you about, and they might be doing something, I don't know, but it would be good to find out more what is going on in the European Union.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, it's something I should actually look into. I'm not up to date on that myself. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there is anything currently happening. In fact, I do know someone I work with on branch, a guy called Chris. He actually did a session at the European Parliament he did a session a few weeks ago, and I haven't actually caught up with him on what happened,
okay.
but on sort of low carbon internet stuff. So yeah, that's homework for me. I'll look into that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. It was brilliant. Really interesting. And
cool.
I think, if we could get this recording up and out, that would be great. Anyway, that's me.
Cool.
All right. Any other questions? We've got another, well, officially 15 minutes, 17 minutes to be precise. Any other questions? Oh, Joanna, you have a question?
Sorry. I was going to say, I think I should probably say at this point, if we're going to build a new website for the North Lancashire Green Party, Jack, we should probably talk about trying to make it as carbon friendly as possible and make a really exciting best practice example, because then we could show other people how it can be done.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. So, and I have been involved, I think I've mentioned to some other people, but I have been involved with the Green Party nationally. It is a difficult thing because it's one of these hard things to get everyone to sort of align around. But yeah, and that's the thing, the more people that come to a website, the more important it is for the people who build it that they make it lightweight, because it's obviously multiplied by everyone that visits it. So there's a lot of power in the hands of web developers, and I think that's where this should all start.
Yeah, and I think that's really fascinating. I mean, the trend has always been towards selling image-led sites, and certainly having been in the industry for a decade, the last decade is all image. Yes, have a video on your homepage, make it as image-led as possible. That's what you have to do. That's
video backgrounds,
practice. You've got to have backgrounds. So it's really fascinating, and I'm hoping to be able to send this recording to my my old colleagues at Hotfoot and say to them, come on, come and pioneer something else.
Yeah, and that's, as I say, there's a few agencies that are sort of really leading with this. And what's great actually is seeing the things they come up with, because they're still very creatively interesting websites. And you can do a lot as a designer with color and with shapes and with, so you can create these sort of, illustrations, for example, can be done much lower carbon than photos. So I'm not saying like the idea of imagery isn't necessarily dead, but it's those high resolution photos, that are not great. And in lots of situations, they're not needed. In some they are, if you're an estate agent or something, you probably need photos. But
it's really interesting. There's a real creative challenge there, and I think that's exciting.
Exactly. Yeah, totally agree.
Cool. Okay, so Kerry and then Gina.
No, not me.
Oh, not Gina. Your hand's still up, Gina. That's why I'm saying. Right, Kerry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. I know, quite right, you were saying at Green Party we're about systemic change, not about individual change. But having said that, what things are there that you can do as individuals using the internet rather than as people producing websites? For example, if you store a lot of things on your phone, tablet or computer, or you have a lot of storage on the cloud, is it going to make a big difference to delete some of that, or not really?
There is actually something
in that. Thousands of emails saved. Is it trying to go through and delete them all, or is it such a drop in the ocean it's not really worth it?
No, there is actually something in that. Yeah. So certainly with for people who use Gmail or something where they've just got all their emails from like the past 15 years and every attachment and everything, there is actually a substantial sort of debt in there, and Google are constantly storing that data, and they're replicating it every time they build a new data center or something. And so there is actually something in that. Like, it's one of those things that, I mean, I've been reading Mike Berners-Lee's How Bad Are Bananas, the new edition, which is really good. And it's some of these things that, he'll say, if you care about this though, like, much more important to just cancel a flight or something than to, so these things are still small, but there are actually, to come to your point, Kerry, there are ways of actually quite substantially reducing your impact. So yeah, the cloud stuff, like me as quite a technical person, I tend to avoid actually using much cloud stuff now, partly also because I find the ways in which some of the service providers here are kind of quite insidious. Certainly something like Gmail at its core is quite a bizarre service, because they effectively read all your emails. Like, it's not an individual person, but they scan all your emails, and then they provide ads that they think are going to be interesting to you based on the emails you receive and the emails you send. And I don't like them knowing that much about me. So although I have a Gmail account, but I don't use it for very much. I use it for sort of Green Party stuff, but not any personal stuff. So anyway, and so I have the same thing about cloud stuff. Like, I don't do loads of backups from my phone, for example. And for people who take a lot of photos and stuff, maybe just do a local backup to your computer or something. It's kind of just going a bit back in time. You're constantly encouraged to back up everything to the cloud. And they're always trying to get you to do it. And obviously I'm advising you to not back up with caution. Like, if you have stuff that's very valuable to you, make sure you are storing it somewhere. But there are increasingly ways of sort of keeping that to yourself. And unfortunately, some of the best things right now are still quite technical. So there's a service called Nextcloud that I use, which is like a cloud service that you own, and you can just set it up on a computer in your house, and it's sort of your own little.
Would you maybe be better off getting an external hard drive that you could back things up to, because then it's not being accessed unless you plug it in?
Yeah, absolutely. So external hard drive is perfect. Yeah. So storing things the old-fashioned way. Obviously, the thing that the cloud services will say is if you have a fire at your house or something, these things can still get destroyed. So it's not. It's a trade-off. But actually, another big, like, some small, kind of simple changes. With something like Spotify, you can download music to listen to later. And certainly, if you listen to the same song a lot, make sure you're downloading those things to your phone, and it's a little tick box thing in Spotify where you can download albums for offline play. That makes a huge difference, because then you're never connecting, you're just playing it off your phone, and that's significantly reducing your connection. So yeah, there's little things like that that make quite a substantial difference, because music
there was something that I did do a few years ago where Google actually sort of told people, and I don't know how many people picked up on this, that if you told people to email you at gmail.com instead of at googlemail.com, that actually reduces your carbon footprint. So
Did they?
collectively, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So
maybe that's wow. I didn't know
you
that.
can. So you now have 2 alternative email addresses that both work. Your name, whatever it is, at googlemail.com and your name at gmail.com. And the reason that they produced, I think, the Gmail alternative is because madly it just a slightly smaller email address, I think, or something like that, reduces the energy. I might have got the technical stuff wrong, but yeah, there's something about that.
That makes sense. I guess another thing, actually, maybe one of the reasons they've said that is that I think, from my understanding, because I originally it was Google Mail because someone else had trademarked Gmail, and then Google managed to get Gmail. It might be down to also the redirects. I think maybe if an email is sent to Google Mail, it has to go. I think ultimately Google send it to Gmail, but they take it, redirect it, send it on to Gmail. So that could be why. And like you say, it would be a few. It's only a few bytes really in the email itself, but yeah, so maybe that's what they're talking about. Maybe it goes through fewer data centers if it just goes to Gmail.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, cheers, Kerry.
Interesting.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Any more questions for Jack? Do we all go off and stream Netflix? But only in SD. Only in SD.
Exactly.
Joanne, have you got a question? You got another question?
No, I was just.
Oh, we just popped on to say hello.
Say thank you. That was really
Yeah,
fascinating.
absolutely.
Thank you, Joe. That's great. Thank you.
Good to see you. I've got to go and do bedtime. Not for
Cool.
me.
I'm going to, but yeah, thanks ever so much. Really enjoyed that. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Cool.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.